We were doing a lot in innovation. We were publishing a lot, but we needed to translate more, patent more, and really help our manufacturing base be competitive for the future. The two witnesses before us today led on the delivery of those commitments and are here to tell us today about the substantial progress their agencies are making during the first year of the implementation of this act. We've already seen the CHIPS and Science Act spur more than $200 billion in private sector investment, from semiconductors across the country to other investments. And the federal government's role in this is so important because the commitment to the CHIPS Program Office within the Department of Congress is generating more than 500 statements of interest from companies looking at new projects and innovation. So today we'll have a chance to ask the Secretary about those proposals, building resiliency and long-lasting semiconductor ecosystem in the United States. Since we had a chance to discuss this earlier, I'm pretty sure we're going to hear today about how we're never going to be in this problem again as it relates to legacy chips, that we are going to have a good plan to help on a supply chain development for that our DoD stature is going to continue to be on the cutting edge of chips. And I think you're going to tell us that the diversity of applications, the robustness of it, means that that ecosystem that we are trying to restore and grow is alive and well. We've also seen NSF begin to roll out innovation engines, with more than $43 million going to planning grants to tap innovation across the country. I love that the director, during our efforts, basically coined the phrase innovation anywhere, opportunity everywhere. And I definitely think that is what we were looking for in this legislation, both in the spreading of the amount of EPSCoR funding and in diversifying a workforce opportunity across the United States. For example, in the state of Washington, a Spokane company won a Regional Innovation Engine Award to advance energy and decarbonization. We all know that innovation and expertise helps us generate jobs and tackle some of our most pressing problems. And we know that what we have to do on this committee, besides hearing from these witnesses today, is push our colleagues to fully fund the aspects of CHIPS and science that weren't funded. In fact, the committee's two previous attempts at competitive bills fell short because the funding was not realized. One, because we faced an economic downturn, and then the other just in our very first effort on competitiveness also didn't make the mark from a appropriations perspective. So we know that our foreign adversaries are not waiting. We know that our strategic competitors are also moving ahead, and we need to make this investment to what we would say de-risk the supply chain and make sure that we are innovating and translating our science faster. As we look to the future, we need to work together to ensure that the U.S. remains competitive in the global marketplace on other issues like artificial intelligence, 5G wireless systems, and quantum computing. And that will require the United States to do a couple of things. The ability of the U.S. to produce chips to support this innovation. That's why the advancement and hearing where we are with the applications is so important. Second, we need a resilient supply chain that can withstand disruptions like we saw in the past, either geopolitical tensions, natural disasters, global pandemics, whatever. We need a more dependent supply chain and a workforce that is well-skilled and technical to the types of technology that are being produced today. I personally believe this is one of the biggest gaps left to be addressed in the CHIPS and Science Act. We have some money, both for semiconductor training and workforce advancements, and some on the science side through NSF. But a lot more needs to happen. The United States, the jobs of tomorrow are here today, but the skill level of the workforce to do them is not. And so the more that we can take advantage of the job creation that's happening by marrying that up, something the Secretary knows from her days as governor, The more we can streamline that and marry that up together, the more this engine is going to rev and keep affecting the U.S. economy. Today, U.S. manufactures only 12% of the world's semiconductors compared to where we were in the 1990s at 30%. So the question really today is, are we seeing the right level of investment to make a return to the market share that we think is important? My guess is we're going to hear both from the private sector investment that's already been made and the robust response to the programs. We're going to hear that the investment wants to be in the United States. So I think we can't emphasize enough how important it was to bring this manufacturing back. Consumers saw car prices raise as much as 40%. Truck manufacturers like PACCAR in my state weren't able to get semiconductors, weren't literally able to ship product. Supply chain resiliency also created deadlocks for other industries and impacted national security. So I hope that we will all work together on better tools for the future. I'll have some questions about that in the question and answer period. But the semiconductor industry today is facing a gap of 67,000 people by 2030. That's just semiconductors. So I know we in my state, as relates just to STEM, have a gap of 60,000 workers across various sectors, not just semiconductors. So clearly we need to make the investments in the scholarship programs and in the STEM apprentices and workforce for tomorrow to realize all this investment that is now being made in the United States of America. So welcome to our witnesses. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Senator Cruz, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for calling this important hearing, and welcome Secretary Raimondo, Director Panchanothan, for both being here today. Semiconductors drive our modern economy. From cell phones and cars to supercomputers and medical devices, these integrated circuits have been integrated into our daily lives. Before 2020, however, when we suddenly couldn't get enough of them, most of us probably didn't realize just how big a role these chips play. It became very quickly apparent that, in terms of economic and national security, just how dependent and vulnerable we are on semiconductors. Yes, we rely on these chips for consumer electronics and cars, but they're also in just about every...
It's a test alert. We knew it was coming. We already did one. It works. Yep.
I think your time is up, Senator.
We have an emergency in semiconductors. That's a first. I believe...
We announced it before you got here, so sorry. We should have given you some indication that that was happening.
I think our first witness is a semiconductor. You done? No.
I don't know whose device. Just shut yours off. Did you shut yours off? You have to shut it off. You have to shut it. Yeah, you have to shut it off. Okay. Somebody out there.
As I was saying, with great trepidation, I observed that just about every advanced weapon system in our military rely on semiconductors, and most of them are not made in the United States. Recognizing this, there was a flurry of legislative activity to onshore and nearshore semiconductor manufacturing last Congress, culminating in the CHIPS and Science Act. Parts of this law, like the FABS Act, which I co-sponsored and enthusiastically supported, provided tax credits to incentivize chip investments in the United States. The final bill, however, also included a whopping $52 billion in direct subsidies from taxpayers that in my view, would predictably lead to government bureaucrats picking winners and losers. At worst, this kind of industrial policy can be rife with political interference and waste, and even at best, it is often done poorly and inefficiently. That's why I ultimately voted against the bill, despite it containing a number of things I strongly support. We're already seeing a number of these concerns realized. When I speak to companies in Texas, many of them bemoan how the Biden administration has imposed extraneous non-statutory conditions on receipt of taxpayer support. Commerce isn't just asking if you've got the best technology or the cheapest manufacturing process. Instead, the bureaucrats want to know if you have proper plans to subsidize child care or to support affordable housing. Have you adequately engaged with labor unions? Are your suppliers sufficiently diverse? None of these topics are critical to the fundamental question of whether you can build the best chip at the lowest price. Maybe these issues are relevant, but does anyone think that officials in Washington know better than the engineers and the investors behind these projects? Moreover, none of these strings were included in the law, but they've nonetheless been attached by the Biden administration to try to enact by regulations things that they don't have the votes to pass through Congress. As many Commerce Committee Republicans noted in the letter that we sent to Secretary Raimondo in March, this attempt at backdoor progressive social policy will only serve to make domestic chip production more expensive, less competitive, and more reliant on taxpayer subsidies over private investment. More recently, an area of major concern has been the onerous environmental requirements under NEPA and the potential for this environmental process law to drive up compliance costs for manufacturers and significantly slow new construction. That's why Senator Mark Kelly and I led a bipartisan amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act to exclude from NEPA the overwhelming majority of CHIPS-funded semiconductor projects. Secretary Raimondo, I want to thank you for your support on that effort and for explicitly endorsing our amendment during your House testimony last month. Secretary Raimondo, we have also had good conversations about the importance of a strong U.S. chip industry. We both want to see America's innovative capacity soar, and we agree that using these taxpayer funds appropriately is immensely challenging. Fortunately, states like Texas are showing us a path forward here. Texas boasts an established ecosystem of innovators, world-class universities, low taxes, and a permissive regulatory environment that enables companies to grow and to thrive. As a result, we have already attracted $61 billion in private new semiconductor investments and created over 8,000 new jobs, making Texas the center of U.S. semiconductor manufacturing. Texas has a storied history in the invention and production of semiconductors, and we're proud to help lead America's semiconductor renaissance. And I would encourage the Commerce Department to look to the model in Texas and to see how to make this broader effort more successful. Finally, it's worth noting that the other half of the CHIPS and Sciences Act, Director Panchanothan, the NSF does substantial work advancing basic science that helps expand our scientific knowledge, and that's important work. But I'm deeply concerned over what appears to be the increasing politicization of NSF-funded science and the feedback loop and the scientific stagnation this is creating. I'm especially disturbed by recent reports that NSF has, to the tunes of tens of millions of dollars, been funding projects on how to counter, quote, populist narratives and so-called, quote, mis- and disinformation, which seems like little more than funding the pseudoscience of censorship. So I look forward to hearing from both our witnesses today on how they are implementing this very important law. The taxpayers have put a lot of skin in this game, and we all owe it to them to get it right.
Thank you. We'll start now with Secretary Raimondo. Welcome. I can't imagine what a busy time it is for you and the organization that is implementing this act. We appreciate your time being here today.
It is my pleasure to be here today. Thank you, Chairwoman, and thank you, Ranking Member Cruz, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to come talk to you about how we're implementing this historic legislation. And of course, I'm so pleased to be here with Ponch, a fantastic NSF Director. I do want to begin by taking just a second to share my condolences with Senator Feinstein's family. She was a pioneer and a role model for so many women like me, so I wanted to just take a second to say that. Because of your hard work, in large part due to you, Chairwoman Cantwell, and bipartisan support of the committee, the Commerce Department now has the honor, responsibility, and to invest $50 billion in our domestic semiconductor manufacturing and research and development. And I concur, this is an enormous responsibility and a massive amount of taxpayer dollars. We opened the application process in February, just a few months after you passed the bill. We have since received more than 500 statements of interest from 42 states, from manufacturers large and small. They outline proposals to manufacture chips and the relevant equipment and materials here in the United States. Very importantly, of the 500 statements of interest, we've received over 100 applications or pre-applications. In the last 2 weeks, we finalized and put out the guardrails to protect U.S. government investments and bolster our national security. We're also developing our CHIPS R&D program to meet the unique challenges of building a sustained R&D to manufacturing pipeline. The centerpiece of these efforts is the National Semiconductor Technology Center, or the NSTC, which we expect to launch this fall. So a great deal of activity since about a year ago that the bill was passed. And of course, all of that research and development work we're doing in collaboration with the NSF. The CHIPS and Science Act also authorized 2 new programs, the Tech Hub Initiative and Recompete, which we are administering through the EDA. We've received 400 applications for the Tech Hub grants. It's unbelievable. I've never seen anything more oversubscribed. Later this fall, EDA will make the announcements of the Tech Hub designations, and then also invite an opportunity for additional funding for implementation. Similarly, we're investing $200 million in the Recompete pilot program to spur economic activity in geographically diverse and economically distressed communities across the country. Thanks to your work in the CHIPS and Science Act, we are making historically bold and strategic investments that will strengthen our national and economic security. If we're successful, when we're successful, the United States will become the premier destination in the world where new chip architectures can be invented in our research labs, designed for applications, manufactured at scale by well-trained, well-paid American workers, and packaged in the United States. So it's a tremendous piece of work that we have, great progress since the bill has passed. Of course, we'll answer any questions related to that. Before I close, just to mention how stressed we were about the possibility of a government shutdown and how troubling it was to come within hours of that shutdown. So thank you for working hard to make sure that that did not happen. It goes without saying, China, Russia, Iran aren't shutting down. The work we're doing in the CHIPS Act is essential to our national security, and any shutdown would be massively disruptive to our ability to stay on the pace that we're on in implementing this very important work. So with that, I will open for questions or turn it over to Ponch.
Thank you. Director Panchanathan, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Cruz, and members of the Commerce Committee. It's great to be with all of you today, particularly with a colleague, a friend, Secretary Raimondo. Before I begin, I would like to extend my deepest condolences to all of you for the loss of your colleague, Senator Dianne Feinstein. Not only was Senator Feinstein an incredible leader and trailblazer, she was also a champion for science, and NSF is grateful for her service to the nation. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the National Science Foundation's implementation of the CHIPS and Science Act and how the agency is building upon decades of successful investments in science, engineering, and technology to ensure that the United States remains the global leader in innovation. For more than 7 decades, NSF has been critical to powering our economy, transforming our quality of life, and securing our national defense, and yes, the Nobel Prizes yesterday and today, and more to come. Many of the technological advances benefiting the nation today, such as artificial intelligence, quantum information science, and biotechnology, are rooted in sustained NSF investments over many decades. However, we currently face intense global competition in the race to develop these technologies and to train the workforce of the future. NSF's ability to enable scientific breakthroughs and accelerate technological developments is central to our economic and national security and our continued global leadership. With the passage of the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022, Congress put in place a roadmap for meeting this challenge while spurring innovation in communities across our country. Over the past year, and with the increased appropriations in FY 2023, NSF has been able to make significant progress in implementing the CHIPS and Science Act. The agency has moved quickly to launch new opportunities for innovation, implement research security measures for safeguarding taxpayers' investments, and engage talent and inspire the STEM leaders of tomorrow. The NSF regional innovation engines will catalyze new businesses and economic growth in diverse regions of America. When the NSF Engines program released its first funding opportunity last year, we received nearly 700 concept papers from every state and U.S. territory of our nation. In May, NSF announced the first ever NSF Engine Development Awards, consisting of 44 unique teams spanning 46 states and U.S. territories. Then in August, NSF announced 16 finalists for the first full-scale NSF Engines. Through these 2 tracks, NSF plans to have invested nearly $200 million in regional innovation throughout our country by the end of this calendar year. I cannot understate how critical it is that we engage every part of our nation in these efforts. NSF has been intentional in implementing new opportunities and expanding existing initiatives to engage everyone who wants to participate in STEM, in every state, across every geographic boundary, drawing the full diversity of our nation. The CHIPS and Science Act included a requirement that NSF grow its investment in EPSCoR jurisdictions over time. I'm very pleased to report that NSF has met and even exceeded the EPSCoR targets in the CHIPS and Science Act of FY23. It is also critical that we safeguard these investments and take steps to address research security while also cultivating vibrant international partnerships. NSF plays a leading role in federal efforts to address research security, and we are expanding the agency's capabilities and competencies to protect taxpayer investments. The CHIPS and Science Act includes valuable provisions that will help NSF build the capacity of the research community to make risk-informed decisions and strengthen the security of our national research enterprise. Equally important to the nation's competitiveness is NSF's commitment to funding exploratory-based research that creates new knowledge and seeds the industries of tomorrow. For example, many of the AI advancements making news today, we celebrate them. Both the innovative products and the talent that is developing them were catalyzed by NSF's continued investments over many decades, even through AI winters. Likewise, the technological advancements of tomorrow will be born out of today's investments. In just the past 3 years, NSF has established 25 national AI research institutes in partnership with federal agencies and industry. The $500 million investment reaches almost into every state, supporting cutting-edge research that is applying AI to key economic sectors like agriculture, weather, and public health. NSF's ability to generate more breakthroughs and foster more innovations, and to do so faster than ever before, is critical to keeping our country as a global leader in STEM. With the support of this committee and Congress, and through continued successful implementation of the CHIPS and Science Act, NSF is strengthening our national and economic security and enabling, to quote again Chair Cantwell, innovation anywhere and opportunities everywhere across our nation. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today.
Thank you, Director. Colleagues know that a vote has started. We're going to have a couple of votes this afternoon, so I just ask you to use your discretion where you are in the queue to go back and forth and try to maximize time. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Senator Schatz, and go vote, and then come back, and he'll chair the meeting and go to Senator Cruz after that.
Thank you, Chair, Ranking Member. Director Panchanathan, thank you for being here. I want to follow up on a conversation we had earlier this year. I know that you made $6.5 million available in fiscal year 23 for the continued development of the 30-meter telescope. What are your plans for continuing the funding and the work to design TMT in fiscal 24?
Thank you very much, Senator Schatz, and I really enjoyed talking to you and visiting the great state of Hawaii recently. We launched the telescope, as you know, the solar telescope in Maui, which is the world's largest solar telescope. And I'm very proud that we have it located in Maui, doing great science. To your specific question, I'm happy to tell you, as you said, just last week, NSF made a $6.5 million award to the Giant Magellan Telescope for GMT and a $6.5 million award to the 30-meter telescope international organization, TMT, to continue development and reduce risk on crucial optical and mechanical components. I want to tell you that there is a process that we take as we embark on large awards. And this includes not only the ASTRO 2020 Decadal Survey recommendations that came, consultations with our scientific community and advisory committees, as well as our Mathematical Physical Sciences Directorate, making sure that we are prioritizing these investments, working with our National Science Board. And so now we are investing in the design and development phase. And that was this investment. So we have plans in terms of how do we move from here to the final design review and then the investment.
So that's 23 that you're mostly talking about 23. So what are your plans for 24?
In the 24, we have budgeted again to continue with this process, and we have asked for $30 million of investment so that we will be able to move these projects forward as these review processes happen. And at the same time, I would like to place this in front of Congress. You know that in the CHIPS and Science Act, the science provisions were authorizations, not appropriations yet. We need that also in place so that we might be in the vanguard of innovation and scientific discovery, for which instrumentation like TMT and GMT are very important as we think about the future.
Thank you. Now talk to me about construction funds for 25. Obviously, you're talking about design. Where are we on construction, and can we work together on the pathway? I understand a lot of it is contingent. You have ASTRO 2020, you have a scientific review process. Yes. We obviously don't have it squared away on the Hawaii side of this. So, but we have to move in parallel paths in case everything comes together. So where are you with 25 and construction money for ELT?
Again, thank you for that. And yes, you are right. We are going through the process that we typically go through in the major research facilities instrumentation. And so we are looking at the 24, 25, and beyond in terms of what is the right positioning for the request to be made for the construction project. Right now, we have to go through the final design review. And as you said rightly, we are working with the state of Hawaii to make sure that we are positioning the appropriate investments in a way that they can be sequenced at the right time. So it is we are still working through the 25, and we will be working through the 26 budgets to think through when the appropriate time is for putting in the construction request. But the final design review has to also go through as we are thinking about how we are moving forward in this process. And we'll be working closely with the National Science Board on this. And Senator, as we have always done, we will keep your staff closely informed and closely engaged to ensure that you're getting all the answers that you need.
Thank you very much, Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Raimondo, the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, the NEPA reviews are currently required for CHIPS grants, and that could lengthen project timelines by 2 years or more from the date the department decides to start an environmental impact statement. Some NEPA reports aren't completed for 7 years or longer. When you were asked about hurdles posed by NEPA to CHIPS projects in a House hearing last month, you pointed out there's currently a bipartisan amendment to the Defense Authorization Act, which would help a lot. So we're going to do everything we can with our team to help streamline NEPA and move it as quickly as is prudent. But if Congress could pass the amendment, I think it's the Cruz-Kelly amendment in the Authorization Act, it would help us a lot to move faster. As you know, that bipartisan amendment passed the Senate with overwhelming bipartisan support, but it is not yet law. It still has to pass the House and ultimately be signed into law by the President. Could you briefly describe the benefits the amendment would provide as a word of encouragement to the House and the White House to make it law?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for your leadership on that. As you say, each of these projects, if they receive federal money, would be subject to NEPA, which could take up to years. We do not have years. These are national security imperative projects, which is why I, again, thank you for your leadership. What we are doing, we've built a team on the CHIPS team in the Commerce Department just to focus on permitting, to help companies, help states streamline the process, accelerate the process within the existing statute. Let me be clear. We don't want to, environmental concerns matter. We are not in any way suggesting that we should do anything that hurts the environment or is unsustainable. That being said, we do need to, which your amendment would do, streamline the process, speed the process, make the process more efficient and user-friendly. Interestingly, earlier today, I was on the phone with members of the House on this exact issue, encouraging them to do their own, take your lead and pass something in the House. My view is it's essential. We're going to do everything we can. We have a team. We're working on it. But without the legislation, it is very difficult.
Well, that's very helpful. Thank you. Let me turn to the topic of spectrum, something both you and I care a lot about. We all know that the United States needs more commercial access to mid-band spectrum. Recent studies project that U.S. mobile traffic to increase more than 2.5 times over the next 5 years and almost 6-fold in the next 10 years. We need a real mid-band spectrum pipeline so that the U.S. can dominate in 5G and not fall behind our adversaries. Unfortunately, access to mid-band spectrum has become almost impossible to come by because so much of the nation's spectrum is under the control of federal agencies who are resistant to sharing. The Defense Department recently completed its report on opening access to spectrum in the lower 3 gigahertz band and gave it to your department at the end of last week. The report has not been made public, but according to leaks, the report does not support sharing, let alone allowing full-power 5G use in the band. Secretary Raimondo, you and I had a very productive call yesterday, and during that call, you committed to sharing the report with me and briefing me on it. I appreciate that. Do you agree that we need more mid-band spectrum to be made available for 5G, including for full-power use, and that it is not only imperative for our economy, but also for our national security?
I do. Let me say this. As I said yesterday, I think I'd be very happy to have my staff, NTIA, and the DOD, I think we should do it together, to come and go through the report. So we'll set that up.
I appreciate that.
And yes, I do. I spoke with Secretary Austin last week, and I said, the DOD needs the spectrum they need to execute their mission, period. Having said that, we also need to be more creative and innovative about how we share spectrum and how we use spectrum, because the truth of the matter is our national defense depends on, as you say, continued private sector innovation and continued innovation in 5G. And my point to him and my point to you and anyone who wants to hear from me is that this shouldn't be a zero-sum game, right? We shouldn't think every time the DOD shares or gives something up, they're losing capacity. We have to find creative ways where we can have more spectrum made available in the mid-range band, as you say, and also the DOD has what they need to do their mission. And I'm committed to working with you and with them to do that.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Director Panchanathan, during fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22, the NSF funded some 70 grants and 2 contracts, totaling over $45 million, focused on both the quote-unquote science of countering social media mis- and disinformation, as well as the development of digital tools to track and censor so-called mis- or disinformation. One of the projects was called Expert Voices Together, and it is, to quote the NSF, quote, creating a comprehensive system of care that addresses the harms journalists experience due to online harassment. Its mission, incredibly enough, is to, quote, support journalists in moments of crisis while helping the media industry build resilience long-term. In other words, taxpayer-funded therapy for left-wing journalists who find actual facts traumatizing. I'm sure people like Taylor Lorenz will be excited about that. But where on earth in the NSF's mandate is there a justification for these sorts of projects? And do you believe that venturing into such politicized topics undermines broader support for the NSF?
Senator, first of all, let me tell you that the reach, I hope that through the hearing today, you will get to see NSF's broad impact all across our nation through STEM talent development, through economic vibrancy that NSF makes possible, and yes, national security objectives also being fostered. I hope that the examples that I will give you, and in the answer, I'm not trying to package all of that, but I hope that that will come through very clearly. We are doing a lot of work about how to make sure the talent everywhere and innovation everywhere is energized.
Could you answer the question, though, that I asked?
Yes, I'm just going to come to that, Senator, because I just want to make sure that the NSF mission is, I just want to make sure that that is clearly understood also. I want to say one thing very categorically. NSF does not engage in censorship. We do not regulate any content and engage with anybody who also does so. But what we do is, how do the technologies operate and how are they being used, and provide the public and policymakers the information that they need so that you can make the informed decisions about needed regulations and guardrails. And for the users, that they have the tool that they can safely navigate content. That's what NSF is engaged in. That's the kind of projects that we fund. We are not in the business of censorship. We are not in the business of controlling content. I can tell you, for example, even in this conversation that we are having right now, in the deepfake realm, this conversation can be completely altered and presented in a form that you and I will say, how did it even happen? That this conversation that we are having right now has been transformed into something that's even unrecognizable. These kinds of things that happen, we are trying to find how can we build, how can we invest in those projects, and how can we invest in tools and techniques that can help safeguard. And that's all we are doing. We are not censoring, and I want to repeat that, we are not altering content.
When you're funding others who are engaged in censorship, you're undermining support for your very important agency.
Senator, maybe I can close with this comment. I'm happy to work with any of you to go through this with you in more of a one-on-one setting and explain what these projects are doing so that it can be helpful. Happy to take your suggestions, happy to take your inputs. NSF, I always say NSF is a learning agency. We learn constantly because we cannot be an agency that says, this is how we do it. We are a learning agency, so happy to take the input and see where, if any, you find that there is, NSF appearing to be, as I have said, we are not, but I'm happy to have the discussion with you.
Thank you.
Senator Tester.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the flexibility. Gina and Ponch, thank you both for being here. I appreciate the work you've done. I appreciate everything you're doing to bring jobs back to this country, and I appreciate everything you're doing on the national security front. Look, for decades, we have outsourced jobs in this country, and it hasn't been a good idea. The Chinese Communist Party is our facing threat, and you both know this, both economically and militarily, and they want to take our place on the world stage. But I have faith in this country, and I have faith in our ability to be able to emerge from a time when we've outsourced our jobs to a time when we can bring the jobs back here again and create what we need in this country to meet the needs of this country. A little over 2 years ago, Congress started debating the CHIPS and Science Act. I started talking to a group of Montanans about building a technology hub in Montana using the Regional Technology Innovation Hubs initiative that this committee created. The vision for this tech hub would be to establish Montana's well-established photonics industry and grow it into a world-class center that can outcompete everyone in technology and is critical to our economic growth and national security. Madam Chair, I am blown away by the effort that Montanans have put forth on this opportunity. Our best, our brightest have worked together. Universities, labor group, financial group, state government have all worked to craft a tech hub plan that works for our state, but most importantly, works for this country. Like any state, funding for universities is not what it should be. And so these universities are used to fighting and beating the hell out of one another to get the money they needed. And the truth is we have watched them work together. I come from a state that was built over 100 years ago by people who moved in where there was no grass and built farms, where there was just grass and built communities and built churches and built hospitals. And now the people in this state of Montana are working together to make sure that Montana can reclaim what we need to have from a technology standpoint to be the nation's or the world's leader. So my question is this to both of you. When it comes to rural America, Congress has addressed it in several different ways, but you both lead implementation of programs at your respective agencies. How do you address the issue of rural America and making sure that your initiatives will work for rural America and do not leave them behind? I don't care which one goes first. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'll go first and I'll be brief. We, as I said earlier, we have been overwhelmed by the quality and quantity of the Tech Hub applications. As you recall, it was authorized for $10 billion. We received $500 million, and we have over 400 applications. So if you come away with nothing else, clearly this is worthy of more funding. We will do a minimum of 20 Tech Hubs, possibly more, and I promise you some will be rural. I cannot promise you it will be Montana, but I promise you some will be rural.
I was hoping for a different answer.
I know
Keep
that.
going.
I know, but I'm trying to be honest here. I promise we will look at yours and all of yours, and there will be rural representation. We are determined to do it. The statute requires it. We're doing a huge amount of outreach. I tell my team there's no substitute for showing up. Show up in rural communities, let them know we're there, and help them to put forward a good application. So we're highly conscious of it, and we're doing a lot of outreach. Look, the only thing I would say is if we pick, say, 20, hypothetically 20, every one of those would be worthy of, say, a $100 million grant to really move the needle and create a hub. That's $2 billion. We have $500 million, and you've authorized $10 billion. So I guarantee you we're focused on rural. I guarantee you you will be pleased with the results, and I guarantee you this program is worthy of more funding.
Thank you. Panch?
Thank you very much, Senator. It was great meeting with you. And when I spoke to you, and I want to reinforce that, NSF's commitment of energizing talent and ideas everywhere across our nation is in full force and is actioned everywhere now, even as we speak. But let me address specific things related to your question about two projects that even just got funded very recently in terms of unleashing innovation in the state of Montana. This is to Montana State University in Bozeman. They are leading an NSF Engines Development Award. These awards are meant to bring all of the innovative capacity in every region to see how we can lift them up through partnerships as well as NSF seeding investments that then can further be built with the higher level of NSF Type 2 awards. And partnering with Commerce and EDA, we have assigned an MOU of regional technology hubs, how we can work together. We are like this. We are not like this anymore. Secretary Raimondo will agree with the fact that because of her leadership and her commitment to working in partnership, the two of us are working closely together, our departments are working closely together, and we don't want anything to fall in between. So this project, for example, is focused on advancing quantum and supporting technologies in the northern intermountain states with Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho. There is another one, which is University of Montana in Missoula, is leading the NSF Engines development focused on advancing precision forestry, which is, you would agree, there is much more in-place innovation, and rangeland technologies. So these were just the awards that were made just a few weeks ago. So you can see that we are constantly exploring options, working with the communities to see what we can do in terms of talent development as well as innovation energization.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Wicker.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and thanks to our two witnesses. I bet neither one of you is surprised that we've had questions already about rural America. And so, Dr. Ponch, let me just ask if since you were specific to Montana, which is a state I really admire, could you tell us the EPS score part of the legislation, how that is already perhaps benefiting researchers in other rural states.
Thank you very much, Senator, for posing that question. First of all, thank you for hosting me in the great state of Mississippi.
Yes, thank you. I believe Mississippi was the first state.
That's the
you were
first
able to
state we
visit
had the
after
NSF Day celebration, right? So it was a great launch effort. And it was wonderful to meet all the different institutions in the state of Mississippi, community colleges, all the higher education institutions coming together, and that we were able to interact with the researchers and students. Now to the state of Mississippi. I saw firsthand, and this confirmed my belief that talent and ideas are democratized and they're everywhere. Now, in the state of Mississippi, we have now invested, and I'm going to go through a few projects in the state of Mississippi, again, very recent ones. Again, the NSF Engines Development Award, the first of those to Jackson State University, focused on advancing food security and climate resilience.
We have a new senator who is an alum of Jackson State.
That's right. And then the next one is to Mississippi State University in Starksville, where we were together. This is on advancing autonomous technologies for advanced manufacturing. We talked about this when we were together with the researchers there. In addition to that, we have invested almost $1 million in Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College on 2 projects to broaden participation in emerging technology programs, as well as increasing the supply and diversity of the IT workforce in the Mississippi Gulf Coast region. These are real projects making a real difference in terms of unearthing the talent and ideas in Mississippi. And to the EPSCoR targets that you and I had a discussion, if you recall, in your office, we said, you asked me the question, do you think that you will meet those targets for FY23 and then going on to FY29? I'm happy to report to you today, in FY23, we not only met, but we exceeded the target. And that these are mutually beneficial.
Thank you very much. And you may want to supplement your answer further. Let me just say, I really don't think this legislation would have passed so easily had we not been able to include the EPSCoR provision. And I do want to thank the chair for her help on a bipartisan basis in that regard. And Madam Secretary, you may want to answer on the record about rural America, but let me go ahead and see if I can follow up on something that Senator Cruz mentioned. Do I understand that you have, you and your office have seen the completed report concerning the lower 3 gigahertz study?
We got it at the end of last week, yes. Yes, we got it at the end of last week.
And so do I understand you to say that there are areas of the report that you disagree with?
I have not gone through it all myself, so you could not understand me saying that. We received it, I think, on Friday.
What did you say that with that regard?
What I said is this: we need to do a better job of being more creative in figuring out ways to have more that mid-band spectrum available for commercial use to power innovation in ways that do not interfere with or in any way degrade the DoD's mission.
Okay, well, let me just say, I agree with that statement that you just made as you said it, and to the extent that the report coming from the Department of Defense is more restrictive in that regard, I would have a problem with that. When are members of the committee and members of the Senate going to be able to see this report?
As I said, we just received it, I think, on Friday of last week. We're going through it now, and I'd be happy to follow up, and we'll have a briefing schedule where the DoD and NTIA can come over whenever you want.
Madam Chair, I like the idea of a briefing. I really think it's less formal, and there's more of an opportunity for give and take. But I think to the extent you say there is room for both sides to benefit and for neither side to have a loss, and I'm reluctant to say side, either department or area of endeavor to have a loss. That's not necessary in splitting the blanket in this regard.
That is my point. I think historically the debate has been approached anytime DoD gives up anything, it is a loss. And I think we have to modernize our thinking. There are ways that if we're creative, they can have everything they need. And also, we must make more available for private innovation because that advances national security as well.
National security benefits from both. Thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator, we will take you up on the briefing.
Yeah, we'll
Senator,
schedule it.
thank you. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Chair Cantwell. It's good to see both of you. Secretary, thank you so much for your visit to Bloomington, Minnesota.
That's great.
You were a big hit there and at Normandale Community College. And I think you saw there that we are one of just a few states that have a full existing semiconductor supply chain, design, fab foundries, tool makers, integrators, gas chemical producers, testing, packaging, you name it. Could you talk about how the Commerce Department is working to support smaller companies looking to get involved in that supply chain?
Yes, I loved the visit, so thank you for having me. Of the $39 billion, we have said about 10 will be used for mature, legacy, and supply chain. So there will be a great deal of money available for smaller companies and supply chain companies, like some of the ones that we met with. So I can assure you that that will happen. And just, I said earlier, we've received 500 statements of interest from, I think, 42 states and over 100 applications or pre-applications. Many of those are smaller companies, supply chain companies. So rest assured that we're looking at those opportunities, not just the very biggest companies that we all know about.
All right, thank you. And then, given that you visited a community college there, Normandale Community College, can you talk about, given that we need 100,000 new semiconductor technicians, another 140,000 people in the trades to build semiconductor manufacturing facilities, and I think we have a shortfall of about 300,000 engineers, 90,000 skilled technicians in the U.S. Could you talk about the importance of community colleges and 1- and 2-year degrees in all of this?
So one of the most exciting facts, I think, in the time that the bill was signed, between then and now, we know of at least 50 community colleges in 19 states that have announced new programs to help American workers find jobs in the semiconductor industry. I mean, I think that's amazing. Just the fact of the passage of the bill, community colleges are mobilizing to say, how do we fill the gap of 100,000 technicians that we're currently short? We, of course, will be establishing the National Semiconductor Technology Center, and a huge component of that will be workforce, and we'll do that in collaboration with the NSF. And I should say everyone has a role to play. High schools with career and technical education, community colleges have a huge role to play, 4-year colleges, PhD programs, up and down the ladder. I think community colleges, though, in training technicians, cyber technicians, process analysts, et cetera, have a particular role to play, and we're already working with them.
Well, thank you, and what a great transition quickly to Dr. Ponch. You mentioned all degrees, and I know that he's going to be visiting the University of Minnesota. You met the interim president when you were visiting, Secretary. Could you talk about, I know they're one of the finalists in the NSF Regional Innovation Engines program. In your view, how can public-private partnerships, Dr. Ponch, help to accelerate innovation?
No, very, very important to have public-private partnerships. In fact, our Regional Innovation Engine program was created with the explicit purpose of how we might bring all of the component parts together to ensure that the innovation is completely energized and catalyzed. So our Regional Innovation Engine program, 44 awards have been made, where 46 states and territories are involved in this. Every one of those awards have a number of industry partners, state governments being partnering in that, and sometimes even a non-governmental organization, NGOs being partners in that. And we have, of course, community colleges, technical colleges, K-12 institutions, as well as research universities. So this is exceedingly important. Let me give you a couple of examples if this will illustrate the point very clearly. We earlier talked about 6G and 5G. We call it the next G, let us say. So the Resilience Intelligent Next Generation System, or the RINGS program, has 35 companies participating in the RINGS program, and the total amount of resources that they bring to the table is $50 million in kind and actual investments. NSF matched that with another $50 million to now have a very robust program of looking at how do we build the next generation networks, including rural broadband being made accessible so that talent and ideas can have access to all the content that we are generating all across our nation. So to the community college, because you asked that question, I cannot but help tell you about this community college. Hennepin Technical College.
Yes, that's in my state.
Is leading an NSF Advanced Technical Education, ATE. This program has been in vogue for a long time. Essentially, community colleges which are invested in for new curriculum, model curriculum, as well as in terms of students.
Very good. Thank you. And we look forward to your visit. We expect
I
you
look forward to being with you.
Be wearing a Gophers hat when you're there, just to bother Senator Fisher with her Nebraska team. But I also want to thank the chairwoman for her incredible leadership on this bill. We wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for Senator Cantwell. Thanks.
Senator Fisher, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you to both of our witnesses for being here today. Between your two agencies, you've received more than $54 billion in appropriations under the CHIPS and Science Act so far. This is an enormous amount of taxpayer money. Earlier this year, the Commerce Department's Inspector General described the novel challenges facing the implementation of CHIPS. The IG highlighted the need for new controls and appropriate oversight for this unprecedented influx of funding, stating that it, quote, may require additional monitoring and reporting to ensure project recipients comply with statutes, achieve intended outcomes, and use funds efficiently, close quote. The Inspector General has also noted that contract and grant fraud now account for 65% of the OIG's Department of Commerce cases. Before fiscal 2021, they represented roughly 35%. Secretary Raimondo, have you planned to implement any specific oversight measures to respond to this concerning development that we're seeing?
Yes, thank you, Senator, and thank you for the question. You are absolutely right. This is unprecedented. The Commerce Department has never implemented anything of this size, and I take that responsibility incredibly seriously. I have a job to achieve national security goals and to protect taxpayer money, and we aim to do both, to be a steward of taxpayer money. We are building a team. Since the time the bill passed, we've built a team of about 150 professionals. I would invite you to meet them anytime. They're incredibly talented people. And we're building a risk team specifically devoted to the issues that you highlight. The risk team is of risk professionals to make sure we're evaluating all the risk, and also, after we put the money out, to make sure that the companies are doing what they said they would do. Also, we don't plan to put the money out to these companies in one lump sum. We plan to put it out on milestone-based achievement, so some money, see what they do. So we are going to be massively transparent, provide notice as we're required to do to Congress for investments of $10 million or more, and have, we're doing an incredible amount of due diligence, all of which will be documented, and as I said, have a whole team devoted to management of risk and compliance of the companies to the promises that they make us in exchange for the money.
Do you, in this report, were there any patterns that emerged? When you see that increase in fraud, were there any patterns, anything specific that companies may be doing that would be red flags to be able to help this risk team to be able to identify them at an earlier time?
Yeah, it's a great question, and of course something that we're obsessed with, always trying to get better. No, not particularly. As was said earlier, putting $50 billion of taxpayer money out in partnership with private sector companies is a challenge. And so I don't think there's any one answer. I can simply tell you the team we have is built with professionals that have 10, 20, 30 years of experience and track record. We're building new systems, whole new systems of due diligence, compliance. Every company, for example, will have to give us a security plan, an R&D plan, a financial plan, open their books to us, share their finances with us, and we will use all of that information to hold them accountable.
You mentioned that you're putting money out, like first payments, second payments,
Exactly.
to be able to keep track of it easier. If you would see anything that was questionable there, can you cancel grants?
Yes, yes. We could claw back money, depending on the situation. Like, for example, if they violated the China guardrails, or we could, we would not fund the next tranche if they didn't meet the conditions that were required.
Right. I would be negligent if I didn't put a plug in for Nebraska as well, since we're going down the dais here, to be able to get a plug in for Nebraska and the good things that we see. I do have a question, though, on how do you define what a region is? And then also, Dr. Panch, if you could say nice things about my state.
Yes.
Look it up.
Yes, no, we have it. Ready to go whenever you're.
But how do you define
Okay.
a region?
So, well, for the tech hubs, we have to have several awardees within each of the EDA's regions. So the Economic Development Agency has statutorily several regions around the country, and we have to have some tech hubs in each region.
So, Senator, first of all, NSF had, of this investment that was made of chips and science, NSF got $200 million over 5 years. The science portion of NSF's is still an authorization, not an appropriation. We are hoping that we will have the investments that is planned in the authorizations to become appropriations, but we are not waiting for that to energize the innovation all across the nation, as you heard that I mentioned that. The $200 million is being used in order to be able to generate the 100,000 semiconductor technicians, workers, researchers that our nation needs very rapidly. The Secretary talked about what we need by 2030, but it is about the fact that it's even beyond 2030, so NSF is working towards that. And in partnership, again, to the earlier question, public-private partnerships, we're working with a consortium of companies, Micron, Intel, Samsung, Ericsson, and others. To the state of Nebraska, since you asked. We are very thrilled. Again, NSF's investments span all parts of our nation, energizing community colleges, universities, and so on. Let me give you a couple of examples from Nebraska. So the University of Nebraska EPSCoR, the R2 Track 1 Award, which is $20 million for the period of 2021-2026, is in this participating in the second quantum revolution by launching an interdisciplinary, interdepartmental, and multi-campus research and education cluster focused on emergent quantum materials and technologies called EQUATE. This is essentially to increase the jurisdiction's competitiveness in the area of quantum science and technologies, as one example. There is another project, again, which we have an award to the Nebraska Lincoln, which is a companion to the Large Hadron Collider work that is happening. So here, we are essentially supporting a CMS detector and a supporting software being developed at the University of Nebraska. So clearly, again, I want to reemphasize this point. You're going to tire me saying this. Talent and ideas are everywhere, and it is our responsibility to find them, nurture them, motivate them, and bring them to life. That's the only way we're going to outcompete other nations.
Thank you. There is no place like Nebraska. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Hickenlooper, I'm going to ask you to chair while I run and vote, and then followed you will be Senator Moran.
And Senator Fisher, I'll put in a plug for Nebraska as well, but only after I put in a plug for Colorado. Thank you, Madam Chair. And it's great to see such a crowd here. I feel a little bit like we're at Sunday Night Football with Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. I haven't seen this many people in this room in quite a while. But Dr. Panchanathan, I know that you attract a crowd and that you have really devoted yourself to these issues. And Secretary Raimondo, just for you other senators should know that we overlapped as governors. And I don't think there's another governor that had a strong bipartisan support, because she made decisions not from a political perspective, but what is the best outcome. And she stole our best ideas, we stole her best ideas. That's sort of the way governor's world works. So we'll start with you, Secretary Raimondo. As a former governor, I appreciate the recognition in your department that innovation and workforce development thrive when local communities have an active seat, not just a seat, but an active seat at the table. And we've been listening to the needs of our communities, and I think Colorado has positioned itself as a leader in startup creation and supporting entrepreneurs, generating a diverse workforce in a range of technology fields, advanced manufacturing, cybersecurity, clean energy, quantum. So I don't have to go on. I think the other senators have done a good job of pitching their states. I don't have to go on in either of these questions, regional hubs or the regional innovation engines, why Colorado is so well suited. But I do think I would like to ask both of you to describe how the department and NSF, how will you coordinate complementary regional tech hubs and regional innovation engines?
Senator, let me start. Even before the CHIPS and Science Act, Secretary Raimondo and I, as soon as she took office, we spoke the very next week and said that we are going to hyper-partner, if there is a term like that. And because we believe that this is in the interest of our nation, of the taxpayers who invest in both our agencies and departments. So we have been, at NSF, in fact, we have a CHIPS steering committee, which is in the Office of the Director, that works almost on a daily basis and a weekly basis of synchronization with the Secretary's office and their steering committee. So every program that the Secretary talked about, the National Science and Technology Centers, the workforce development activities, the EDA activities, the regional technology hubs, every one of those activities are highly coordinated. In fact, when the regional technology hubs announcement were being made, even the verbiage of the announcement was coordinated between NSF and Commerce and vice versa. So that's the level of coordination we have, because we believe that we don't want to lose any of these innovation and innovators by having any of these valleys of death, as we call them, so that we are making sure that we are tightening those gaps so that we can carry the innovation all the way from fundamental research to applied translational work to then into the innovation outcomes that we seek.
Just one quick addition to that, and I agree, and it was very, very well said. Everyone knows, if you talk to industry and academia, everyone will tell you NSF job training programs are, world-class, the curriculum, the approach. So we want to learn from that, and then, of course, expand it, because we now have all of this additional money. But in the NSTC, for example, which we're going to establish this fall, NSF is a founding member of that. So we're really trying to bake in the NSF to everything we do, and frankly, leverage all of their great work, especially around workforce training.
You're way ahead of us, and that's very, very encouraging. Gina, Secretary Raimondo, the CHIPS plus Science directs the Office of Science and Technology Policy to develop the Interagency National Science and Technology Strategy to establish national research goals, and especially in terms of emerging technologies. And we've been looking at how research and standards, new commercial applications in the field of AI are going to transform not just our economy, but our global competitiveness. So I thought it would be useful just to get what priorities does the department see are important in this kind of forthcoming strategy to reflect in the field of AI.
So we should visit on this when we have more than 19 seconds to talk about it. But NIST, as you well know, NIST is the standard-setting body. They are kind of the lead agency now in the administration's work on AI. They've already put out their risk management framework, which is voluntary risk guides for developers developing AI. And the special sauce of NIST is that because they're a neutral third party, everyone trusts them. So industry will collaborate with them, universities will collaborate with them, and that's the entity that will be forming the new standards. And, candidly, and I know I'm out of time, I think, there will be a US-led ecosystem, and we need of AI. We lead the world, and we need to make sure that the standards that fuel that are consistent with our democratic values. So we can have a further discussion.
No, absolutely, and I agree completely. And I think NIST, just to our large audience, I think NIST is one of the most effective organizations we have in the government. I think they do a remarkable job at an almost impossible job. I mean, a remarkable success at an almost impossible job. All right, I'll yield, but I get to ask questions later because now I'm chairing, so I'll get to come back. Senator Thune.
Mr. Chair, I would yield to my colleague down just to my right, Senator Moran, who has been waiting patiently.
Senator Moran.
Very patiently to ask questions.
Thank you, Senator Thune, for yielding, and thank you to the Director and to the Secretary for your presence with us today and the work that you're doing to implement the Science and CHIPS Act. I would not take up my time, very much of my time anyway, to reiterate what's been said time and time again in regard to rural and small business. Thank you. Director, we might have a conversation in the future about, I'm pleased with the EPSCoR that you met the standard, the goal. I'd be interested in knowing if there are challenges that you will face in continuing to meet that or exceed that goal in the future. Secretary Raimondo, could you update the committee on your efforts to ensure rural states and small businesses benefit from the CHIPS and Science Act, particularly via the Tech Hubs and CHIPS program?
Yes, thank you, Senator. So, as I said, we will be putting out the Tech Hub designations this fall, and we will ensure that there will be geographic representation, including rural representation. Much of that is because we've been doing outreach to rural communities to let them know the money exists, we want them to apply, and to help them apply. As I said before, it's so oversubscribed that I have no doubt there'll be rural places we would have liked to have invested in that we won't be able to. With the CHIPS part of it, just last week, we put out a funding opportunity for small and medium-sized supply chain companies. And I promise you, we are going to work overtime to have small suppliers, small chip companies eligible for the money.
You have reassured me of that at least 16 times, and I'm thankful that it's still true today. Would you describe, Secretary, the process for evaluating Tech Hub applications, and in particular, what role does the EDA regional offices play in that process?
So the EDA region, it is, as I said before, it's a merit-based process. We have national security goals that we need to achieve, and those are primary. Another thing we evaluate is likelihood of success. How strong is the partnership? Is there full buy-in from the community? The decisions are going to be made by a committee in DC with advice and consultation from the local offices.
Thank you. Regional offices.
Regional offices,
yes.
Yeah.
Could you tell me, Secretary, if there is value in an application for a Tech Hub that originates by a state? The Tech Hub application originates by a state as compared to an entity, a different entity?
I don't think that there's no preference either way.
Okay.
We're open.
The timeline for Tech Hub announcements, Tech Hub designees and development grant awards?
This fall, as soon as possible.
Then expect to see CHIPS program awards at what point in time?
Also this fall. Let me say this. I am moving as fast as I can, but it's more important to get it right than move fast, and it depends on companies applying and having good applications. Having said that, I hope Tech Hubs will be in the coming weeks, and I hope we will have some CHIPS funding announcements this fall.
Thank you for the explanation, and it's one with which I agree. Finally, I want to talk about Huawei. Export controls on AI technology. Details about what they seem to have accomplished, what Huawei has seemed to accomplish The details of that remain unclear. We have a particular interest in our appropriations process in the Bureau of Industry and Security within your department. There was a significant funding boost in FY 2023. I want to get to my question in the next few seconds that I have. What gaps remain in U.S. technology export restrictions that may have allowed a targeted company to manufacture an advanced semiconductor?
Okay, this is a critical thing, and we should visit when we have more time. Let me just say, the reports about Huawei are incredibly disturbing, and although I can't comment on any investigations, I promise you, we take every credible threat seriously and investigate to the fullest wherever we think there is some credible allegation that a company has done an end run around our export controls. We need different tools. I'm supportive of the GUARD Act, which would, and the Restrict Act, which would codify our ICTS authorities. We need that to have a comprehensive approach to go after connected apps. We would need resources additionally to do that. I think we need additional resources around enforcement to do exactly what you're talking about. And candidly, the threat is different today. The threat from China in 2023 is different than the Cold War threats of decades ago. It is technology, it is AI, it is moving fast, and so I would welcome a broader discussion with you around how we modernize what we do and how we properly fund what we do.
There's been lots of wake-up calls. Huawei is a particular one that stands out, received significant attention, and I would welcome the chance for your direction, suggestion on how we, either as appropriators or authorizers, could be helpful in closing this opportunity for China's technology theft.
We will do it. I mean, I have to say I'm proud of the fact that under my watch, we imposed the largest fine ever in history, $300 million fine against a company called Seagate for violating our export controls, selling to Huawei. So we're as tough as we need to be, but more resources would be helpful.
Was the fine collected?
Yes.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Cantwell. Thank you to the ranking member for this important hearing. Secretary, thank you for being here. Director, thank you for being here. Secretary Raimondo, one thing I wanted to share with you and also Chair Cantwell is to show support for ranking member Cruz's question to the Secretary on mid-band spectrum and coordination between the Department of Commerce and Defense to ensure more mid-band spectrum is available for 5G wireless. So I don't have a question at this time. I only wanted to show support for the request from Senator Cruz and the commitment from the Secretary to brief Congress on the study that the Department of Defense submitted last week. So thank you very much for that. As you know, I'm proud of New Mexico's long history of connecting scientific innovation, national security, global competitiveness, and for over 75 years, our Department of Energy national labs have served the nation with their international leadership in scientific discovery and innovation. Created through CHIPS and science, the NSF innovation engines are designed to create regional scale innovation ecosystems across the nation to accelerate the development of critical technologies. These innovation engines will provide another opportunity for states like New Mexico to support the nation by driving the scientific innovation needed to maintain international leadership. Director, I was pleased that your testimony acknowledged a fact that we all know too well. The economic prosperity produced through scientific innovation has not been shared equally across our nation. My question, Director, yes or no, do you expect that the choice of regional innovation engines will provide economic opportunities to those communities that are too often overlooked?
Yes, and I can give you many examples if you would like.
I appreciate that very much, and I will submit something to get those specific responses as well. I was happy to see that one of the 16 Innovation Engine finalists is the New Mexico Space Valley Coalition, which is dedicated to growing the nation's commercial space industry. The New Mexico Space Valley Coalition includes the city of Albuquerque, leaders from the private industry and universities across the state of New Mexico, including Navajo Technical University. Director, as you already know, the coalition in New Mexico is an incredibly talented group that represents the diversity of my state and the United States of America. By all measures, the New Mexico Space Valley Coalition appears to be a perfect fit for the innovation engine decision. The CHIPS and Science Act established a technology, innovation, and partnership director at the National Science Foundation. Of those three words, technology, innovation, and partnerships, partnership is very important. By expanding authorities for not just the National Science Foundation, but also the Departments of Energy and Commerce, the CHIPS and Science Act makes clear that no single department or agency can do it alone. The scientific challenges we face are too big, the timeline to meet these challenges is too short, and the international competition is too strong. I was pleased to see that NSF and the Department of Energy signed an MOU to partner on finding solutions to many of these challenges. Director, yes or no, for the National Science Foundation to successfully implement the new authorities provided by CHIPS and Science, will the agency need partners like the Department of Energy?
Yes, and we do that in large measure with the MOU, and there are many examples again of that too.
Can you share some of those examples that you just shared through that MOU as well, but others that show that connection and that partnership with the Department of Energy?
We'll be happy to do that, yes.
Now, Secretary Raimondo, thank you for your leadership and for leading the Department of Commerce, especially in this space where so many of the challenges that we face as a country will fall under your leadership and the jurisdiction of the Department of Commerce and your team. We just heard from the director how NSF is partnering with the Department of Energy. Can you share with the committee how the Department of Commerce is engaging the Department of Energy and the national labs in implementing CHIPS and Science?
Yes, thank you. We also have an excellent cooperation with the Department of Energy, and in particular in the National Science and Technology Center, which will stand up this fall. They, along with NSF, will be one of the founding entities. And so they will have a real role to play in establishing the center, defining the priorities, and we plan to rely on their expertise very heavily.
I appreciate that very much. And Madam Chair, as I yield back, I just want to note for the record a concern that I have, which is looking at the aggressive posture from the administration solely for the National Science Foundation top line. I have a concern when I'm looking at the top lines for NSF compared to the Department of Energy Office of Science. And I think that Congress and the administration need to expand funding for both NSF and the Office of Science at similar rates if we're going to work to make sure CHIPS truly succeeds as well. So with that, thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Senator Thune.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Raimondo, thank you for being here today. I've been working with members of this committee on both sides of the aisle to develop a light touch framework for oversight of artificial intelligence, and as I'm sure you are aware, AI is a major focus for the Senate. In your written testimony, you indicated that the CHIPS and Science Act will help enable us to be the global leader in emerging technologies, and you specifically referenced the new National Semiconductor Technology Center. I'm focused on ensuring that the Senate puts the necessary guardrails in place while also ensuring that any legislation encourages and not stifles innovation in AI. So could you explain in more detail how the National Semiconductor Technology Center and the CHIPS and Science Act more broadly is encouraging innovation in artificial intelligence?
Thank you. I agree with you strongly. The United States has a competitive edge in the world right now. We are leading the world in AI, and we need to preserve that lead and extend that lead. And so we have to preserve our competitive edge. Having said that, we have to balance the opportunity with guardrails that make sure that we protect ourselves from the downsides. So NIST, part of the Department of Commerce, has put out a risk management framework, which is voluntary, to developers for safeguards they should use as they develop new AI algorithms, similar to the voluntary commitments that the President and the administration have extracted from the biggest AI developers. With respect to the NSTC, that will be research and development. So whether it's new materials, new ways to develop, new semiconductor chips, right? All AI is going to be powered by AI chips, where again, we lead the world. I think the NSTC will have collaborations with universities and companies to lead the next wave of research and development and startups so we continue to maintain our AI lead.
Thanks. This administration continues to push for public utility-style regulations on the internet. USDA has tried to insert so-called net neutrality rules in its Reconnect program. NTIA has thrown in a number of extraneous requirements in the BEAD program. And just last week, the FCC announced that it will be reinstating the Obama-era Title II regulations on the internet. Don't ask me why you would want to regulate the internet as a Depression-era monopoly, but they seem to be headed back down that road. With respect to the BEAD program, I find it troubling that the administration would put over $40 billion in broadband funding at risk just to accomplish a campaign talking point. And what I would argue is that instead we should be establishing efficient BEAD rules that incentivize the participation of companies that have spent years building out reliable networks to some of the most remote parts of the country. Will you commit to not require states to include specific price points for broadband offerings in their BEAD plans? Yes or no?
Yes, we do not require that. I want to be clear. We are not rate regulating, we are not price setting, and we are not requiring states to do that. Furthermore, we want all providers, large and small, to participate in the program. The way we're doing is every state, your governor would create a plan that they think could meet the needs of your state, and then our job would be to evaluate that before we fund the plan.
All right, so you would commit that NTIA will give states discretion how to implement
Yes.
the low-cost and middle-class affordability requirements. In 2022, I introduced the Quantum Network Infrastructure and Workforce Development Act with Senator Hassan, which was ultimately enacted as part of the CHIPS and Science Act. And among other things, the bill asks to build on the expertise of NIST to improve existing research on quantum networking and encryption. These applications have the potential to greatly enhance network security and protect privacy while bolstering U.S. leadership and competitiveness in the development of these technologies. Could you describe how the department has worked to promote U.S. competitiveness and innovation in the development and standardization of quantum technologies, including through the implementation of this bill?
I'd be happy to, and I will follow up with Dr. Locascio, who runs NIST, but I can tell you that quantum, AI, and chips are areas where we are exceedingly focused to develop standards and to focus our investments.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to our witnesses, welcome. It's good to see both of you here, and thank you for all the great work that you do. Secretary Raimondo, I believe in order to be a great country that you actually have to make things, and it has to be our focus. You and I have talked about that before, and one of the primary goals of the CHIPS and Science Act was to increase domestic production of mature semiconductor chips to address the crisis that we saw in the automotive supply chain, a crisis that was preventing consumers from being able to purchase vehicles and resulted in furloughs of auto workers due to the shortage of mature chips. In fact, we had parking lots full of automobiles and pickup trucks and other vehicles that just needed a chip or two before they could head off to the dealer. Your department has pledged to spend $10 billion in the CHIPS funding to fix that. And certainly love to have an update on that, but hope that your commitment will stand through the full expenditure of that necessary investment in that industry. But in addition to making more mature chips here in America, we must also use the CHIPS and Science Act to invest in the future of the automotive industry, and that means research and development. Michigan stakeholders have already mobilized to meet that challenge, and one example is the STAR initiative to establish a semiconductor center of excellence in Michigan, led by the internationally renowned research center, IMEC, semiconductor equipment manufacturer, KLA, the University of Michigan, and Washtenaw Community College. The STAR initiative will focus on advanced microelectronic research for vehicle electrification and autonomous automotive solutions. These innovative solutions will help cement the United States leadership, not only in the future of semiconductors, but also in the future of the automotive industry. So my question for you, Secretary Raimondo, as you disseminate CHIPS R&D funding in the coming months, will you commit to considering the crossover impacts that semiconductor R&D projects can have on other industries, like the automotive industry, as a way to maximize the impact of these funds?
I will, but let me say this. As you know, the statute, as you well know, the statute requires a $2 billion set-aside for the mature node chips. And we have said that we believe we'll invest closer to $10 billion in supply chains, mature and current node chips. And that is still our plan. We think that's what's necessary to get the job done. With respect to your other question, early in the new year, we will be getting the NOFO out, the funding opportunity for the R&D portion. And I will commit certainly to work with you between now and then as we design that application before putting it out early in the new year. But I do want to be clear, and I've said this all along, the point of the CHIPS program isn't just to incentivize a few new fabs and call it a day, right? That's not enough. That is not success. That's necessary but insufficient. The point is to do exactly as you say. It's to stimulate research and development. It's to stimulate job training and to have a whole ecosystem that that we need to deepen in the United States, including applications like in the auto industry. So we're in violent agreement on this, and I look forward to working with you.
Very good. Well, I'll look forward to that as well. I'll raise another issue related to semiconductors, and that's advanced packaging, which is a significant part of the chip supply chain, as you well know, that I believe needs significant focus as part of our onshoring efforts to bring this back to the United States because of its importance both from a national security perspective and for American workers and consumers. Calumet Electronics in Calumet, Michigan, with the help of incredible engineers from the Michigan Technological University up in Houghton, is doing incredible work on advanced packaging, particularly by making very advanced printed circuit boards for defense applications, and they're expanding their capacity. My question for you is, as we try to ensure this supply chain is supported, can you speak to how advanced packaging will be prioritized in funding going forward?
Yes. This fall, we'll be putting out a strategy paper on our packaging strategy, our plan, so you'll be able to see that soon. But let me tell you this, right now we don't really do advanced packaging in the United States. It is a huge problem that doesn't get much attention. Even if we make the chips in the United States and then ship them to Asia to be packaged, that doesn't secure, doesn't hit our national security goals. So we are deeply committed at the end of this implementation to have advanced packaging on our shores. And as I say, later this year, we'll put out more details on the strategy.
Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Let me stay with this issue on the fabs. And I had looked at your notice of funding opportunity when you were talking about we could have as many fabs as we want and how we have to move forward on this with the supply chain. So my question for you is looking at the investment tax credit. And should Congress look at harmonizing the investment tax credit in 48D to align with the program that you are running to ensure that the law allows for manufacturing for the facilities that you claim are going to be necessary and for being able to reshore much of that activity? And then how are you working with Secretary Yellen on this?
So, I'll leave it to Congress to decide if and how you might want to amend the legislation. The legislation is currently crafted has the tax credit being more restrictive than the CHIPS Act, than the grant. So it's intended by statute that the tax credit is more restrictive than the grant program.
Yes, my question is, should we harmonize that?
Once again, I have to think about that, to be very
Okay.
honest.
If you want to get back to me on that, I think your insight on this is something that is important.
Okay.
So, Dr. Punch, again, we almost got you into a UT jersey when you were there in Tennessee, and we'll get you back. Let's talk a little bit about microelectronics and ultraviolet lithography and the work that is being done there. What are you doing to make certain that we don't have several different agencies that are working on this, but we're not harmonizing that work?
Senator, it was great to be with you and at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, where we announced the Regional Innovation Engine, which I keep talking about. This was focused on transportation, electrification, and digitization. And specifically to your question, we have very tight partnerships with all of the agencies in topical areas that brings us together. For example, we have an MOU with the Department of Energy.
So you're watching the duplication?
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
That's what I wanted to hear, and I know people in Tennessee wanted to know that. Yes. Secretary, I want to talk a little bit about your trip to China. Did you think it was a success?
It was a productive trip, certainly.
Were you able to hold them to account?
I was clear that there'll be no negotiation on anything related to national security or export controls.
And did you call them out about committing genocide against the Uyghur Muslims?
I did.
And their response?
I didn't get much of a response.
Okay. And have you visited Taiwan?
I have not.
Any reason for that?
I have had no reason to visit Taiwan.
No reason to visit Taiwan? And even though they're a primary supplier of a lot of chips, do you consider Taiwan a country?
The administration's policy is clear on Taiwan, and
so you're not going to deviate from that?
Absolutely not.
Okay. All right. I think that we're all very concerned about continuing to bolster our leadership, whether it is going to deal with semiconductors, broadband, AI, quantum, the microelectronics that we were just discussing, and we cannot afford to fall behind the CCP. We just can't. And it's going to take calling them out on this and holding them to account. And in my opinion, it is going to take supporting Taiwan and the work that they are doing. And of course, you know, we've got to make certain that the CCP-controlled entities don't benefit as we move forward implementing chips. And I think it's also, Madam Chairman, one of the reasons that we've got to get busy with the NQIA and make certain that we get that reauthorized this year. And I had read the article in The Hill where they mentioned that quantum computing capabilities are things that the Chinese Communist Party is going to use to bolster their surveillance and their satellite movements. And as you look at this, it is imperative that we not give them 1 inch. And I think that sending that message that, yes, indeed, Taiwan is someone we can work with and they want to have our business is something that's important. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. Senator Welch. And I just asked the members, we are on a tight time frame with our witnesses, and we don't want to get through everybody, so just keep to your time if you can. Senator Welch.
I will. Secretary Raimondo, first of all, I think you're doing a great job, and we're excited in Vermont about the CHIPS Act. And I thank my colleague, Todd Young, who played such an instrumental role in getting that passed. We have real production of gallium nitrate chips printed on silicon chips, and that's a new technology that is providing greater power. Global Foundries, which is a very large company in Vermont, is a leader in this. And I want to give you an opportunity to explain what the department is doing to continue to incentivize the development and manufacture of mature legacy node semiconductor technology?
Yes, thank you, Senator. Nice to see you. As I said, the statute requires that we invest at least $2 billion in grants in legacy nodes. We believe that we will invest significantly more than that because these are the chips that are essential. I will say we've also executed an MOU with the Department of Defense whereby they can share information with us around their needs for the defense industrial base. Much, if not most, of the defense industrial base needs these existing node, mature node, and legacy chips. So that is another reason why we are so focused on making sure we have enough supply in the United States.
Thank you. Another question of real interest to us in Vermont are the regional tech hubs program that, of course, as you know, was part of Chips and Science. We've got applicants, and is there a commitment from the EDA and the Department of Commerce to follow the requirements in that program around rural and EPSCoR states, and that Vermont would be among them?
Yes, of course.
And the deadline for phase 1 solicitations was August 15th, and there's a lot of interest in knowing when we're going to hear. And I don't know if you can comment on that, but it would be good to have some visibility into when we can expect an answer.
Yes, Senator, as I said earlier, we are working as fast as we can. We've received over 400 applications from nearly every state. I hope to be able to have news in the next month or so.
Okay, thank you very much. And I wanted to ask Dr. Panchanathan a few questions. We really appreciate all that the ACT is doing and you're doing to help clean energy innovators from the development stage all the way through commercialization. And all of us are a little bit blue about how we developed solar, but then we lost commercialization in China. So I want to give you an opportunity to express what you're doing to ensure that the Directorate of Technology is bringing clean energy technologies from the research phase to the commercialization phase in the U.S.
Thank you very much, Senator Welch, for the opportunity to weigh in on this. In May of this year, we announced the first ever NSF Engines Development Awards, which I talked about. 7 of those awards include sustainable energy as a topic area. In August, we announced 16 NSF Engine finalist proposals. 2 of those include the topic areas of sustainable energy. In addition to that, many of our existing programs that is in the translation phase in terms of what you refer to as resulting in startups or small companies being invested in, the SBIR and STTR programs have also got significant clean energy portfolios as well. So as an example, the Vermont startup Rich Earth LLC is aiming to leverage clean energy technologies while in the process of optimizing wastewater treatment for nutrient and water recovery. So TIP has also launched the Accelerating Research Translation Program. So there's a number of those activities that is focused on clean energy and sustainable energy. So I hope that this addresses your question.
I want to stay within the chair's concern, and I just want to make a comment about working with us on the letter of credit that's going to hammer us if it stays at its current level in the BEAD program. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. Senator Vance.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Secretary Raimondo, and a witness for being here. I appreciate it. I want to say, or at least echo, some of the comments that colleagues from across the aisle have made of my colleague, Senator Young, and some of the great works done on the CHIPS Act. I, of course, wasn't here when the CHIPS Act was passed, but I certainly would have supported it because I think it's important to bring American manufacturing, especially in high technology industries, back to our country. There have been many stories and many questions raised since the CHIPS Act was passed about its implementation and also how companies are benefiting or not from some of its resources. I want to focus on one particular barrier, just to start out with Secretary Raimondo, which is the labor shortage. You hear a lot from folks who are working in the chip industry that we have a labor shortage. You hear this, of course, from Taiwan Semiconductor which has tried to build a $40 billion facility in Arizona and is effectively trying to import skilled engineers from Taiwan because they say they can't get the labor from here. Is that an accurate assessment of the situation, that we have, of course, the need to produce chips in America, but we also have a shortage of skilled labor and recruiting the people to actually make those chips?
Yes, it is. Listen, I think, and as we have said, we will be using some of the CHIPS Act to devote to labor and training and workforce. And in fact, since the passage of the bill, over 50 community colleges have started new initiatives to train people. But there is no question, we think we'll create about 500,000 jobs, at least, through the implementation, and we need to do more to train people to that.
So being mindful of time, Secretary Raimondo, I want to point to a particular set of implementation criteria that, in light of the admitted labor shortage, gives me some concern. So one of the administrative directives says that applicants to CHIPS funding must, quote, develop an equity strategy in concert with their partners to create equitable workforce pathways for economically disadvantaged individuals in their region. Additionally, applicants must recruit from diverse sources of talent and, quote, set and publicly communicate goals for workplace diversity. Now, I note, of course, that creating these diversity mandates within a company actually requires additional costs. You have to hire diversity consultants. You have to hire additional human resources people. And so I guess I'm struggling to make sense of the fact that we apparently have a shortage of skilled labor to manufacture chips on the one hand, and yet the Secretary of Commerce is telling people that they can only hire the people who check the right diversity boxes. That doesn't make a ton of sense, and it seems to be counterproductive to the goal of bringing this industry back to the United States in the first place.
So first of all, there are no mandates. Second of all, it's completely consistent.
What would you call it, Secretary Raimondo, when the Secretary of Commerce says you must do this in order to receive funding? If it's not a mandate, what is it?
What it is that we are telling them they have to show us a workforce plan, and we need to evaluate that plan.
They have to show us a workforce plan in order to receive money from the federal government, and that is the definition of a mandate. You must do X in order to receive Y dollars. Let me make this point, Secretary Raimondo. Look, think about this from the perspective of a company that is thinking about locating a chip fabrication facility in this country or in China. From China, they get cheap labor, massive subsidies, and a government that seems to want to work with them. From the United States, they get a little bit of money and a human resources statement that looks like it was written by a 22-year-old gender studies graduate of Harvard or Yale, which, let's be honest, it probably was written by a 22-year-old gender studies graduate of Harvard or Yale. Why would you locate your facility in the United States of America when you get a human resources lecture from us, but from China you get a whole lot of money and a whole lot of facilitation for your business? What's the market economy here? Is it the economy that makes it hard to do business or easier to do business? I'm curious, where would you locate the facility given those two separate sets of criteria?
Sir, before I went to China, I talked to about 120 CEOs of U.S. businesses, and they all told me that China is becoming increasingly uninvestable. I think there's no doubt that I would locate my business in the United States.
I agree with you, and I agree these companies should locate their business in the United States, but we have to be careful. The reason that China has become uninvestable is because it's very, very hard to get our money out. But if we make it harder to do business, and if we pass bipartisan legislation that puts money into American manufacturing, and then we make it harder to access it unless you check the diversity box, we're going to be extremely counterproductive. I am mindful that I am at the end of my time. The last point that I'd make, Secretary Raimondo, the United States, thank God, does not have a chief diversity officer. I would appreciate it if the Biden administration didn't pretend to be one. Thank you.
My job is to protect taxpayer money, and in order to do that, these companies have to be able to meet their mission, and in order to do that, they need to have a trained workforce, and I'm going to work with them to make sure that happens.
I don't think diversity mandates are part of that. Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it, and thank you for holding this important hearing. And Secretary Raimondo, Director Panchanath, thank you for your testimony today. It's really appreciated. I want to take a moment to recognize the work that the Secretary Raimondo and Director Panchanath have done to implement the CHIPS and Science Act. You have built a team that has gone above and beyond to quickly and efficiently roll out these programs so that we can strengthen our STEM workforce and bring good paying jobs right here at home, to everyone's point. That's what we want. And so we've talked a lot about advanced manufacturing. Of course, we passed the CHIPS and Science. We've been all talking about this. We want to bring manufacturing back to America. We want to create those good paying jobs here. And as we do this, again, everyone's talking about creating the workforce with the training and skills necessary. I am proud to support that bill, and I'm proud that it included language that I drafted with Senator Blackburn to provide funding, workforce education, training, and development in advanced manufacturing. And this provision was based on my bipartisan Advanced Manufacturing Jobs in America Act. So, Director, can you please provide us an update on the implementation of the workforce provision? And then Secretary Raimondo, can you talk a little bit after that, how we include our smaller communities and our rural communities in being sure that they can grow out advanced manufacturing?
Thank you very much, Senator. Thank you very much, Senator. Again, I want to say it was a pleasure being in Reno, Nevada, announcing the Regional Innovation Engine there. I'll come to that in a moment. To answer your question, NSF received $200 million over 5 years to establish the workforce development plans focused on microelectronics. But as you know, NSF is the STEM workforce development agency for the country in all aspects of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics in terms of the broad-based mandate, which focuses on K-12, as well as university, community colleges, and beyond. So this $25 million investment in FY23 and FY24 is focused on bringing up, as I said earlier, training upwards of 100,000 new semiconductor researchers, practitioners, technicians, and educators, fulfilling a key need of the semiconductor industry through FY 2027 and beyond. So our funds have been used primarily in the partnerships that we have had with Intel and Micron to scale it, as well as the Future of Semiconductors program, as well as computer science for US program, and specifically focused on microelectronic and semiconductor workforce development. I'm happy to talk more about this in the interest of time. I just want to make sure that I'm respectful of the overall time constraints that the chair talked about. But I'm happy to say that in Reno, Nevada, we are involving the Truckee Meadows Community College in training the talent towards lithium mining, processing, as well as recycling. Thank you.
That's great. I have a lot to talk about there, and we love our community colleges in Nevada.
Just to, nice to see you, Senator. Just to briefly add on to what Panch said, last Friday, we put out an additional funding application for small suppliers. Additionally, as I've said earlier today, we are committed to investing in or providing grants to small, medium, and large semiconductor companies. In fact, as we've talked about, the United States lost about 25% of its small manufacturers in the past 25 years. Many of them are specialty chemical companies or material companies. And so we are very much interested to partner with these companies in the CHIPS program to build out the entire supply chain all over the United States.
Well, Secretary Raimondo, I know I have a minute left, so I'm going to be very quick. I want to build on this in the rural areas and in the mining areas that the Director talked about too. I'm a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. We're thinking a lot about the national security implications of our critical mineral supply chains. These minerals are in the ground in rural Nevada. It is really important. We're the nation's leader in hard rock mining and battery recycling. And so talking about our workforce, talking about all the things we can do, what more can Congress do to bolster our critical minerals workforce, strengthen our supply chain? And of course, for us, that's really going to help our small and rural communities in Nevada.
I think we need to continue to focus on it. We need a comprehensive national plan as it relates to critical minerals, which is essential for electric vehicles and semiconductors. We at the Commerce Department are trying to build and have asked for, I think, $20 million to set up a supply chain office in the Commerce Department so we can be proactive, not just reactive, in identifying all of our holes.
Well, thank you. I look forward to working on that. Madam Chair, I made it with just right about on time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome. Good to see you. I want to get to just 2 or 3 topics, so I'll go kind of quickly. But as you know, the DoD is in the process of evaluating commercial 5G use Madam Secretary, in use in the lower three. It's my understanding they've issued a report, they've talked to you about it, they've shared it with you, and also the NTIA. And there's a lot of hesitancy, I think, from a variety of reasons for other agencies, for a variety of reasons, of making additional spectrum available for commercial use. It's finite, so I think the collaboration is really important. And you play an important role in advising the president on this, as you know, and understanding what our nation's spectrum strategy ought to be and what additional federal spectrum available for commercial use, whether it's licensed, shared, licensed, or unlicensed, what that ought to be. So it's critical. I think that, I serve on the Armed Services Committee too, in addition to this committee. So there's a balancing act here, right, of not just national security, but obviously economic security. What are you doing specifically to have or evaluate a strategy here? And what would you do tomorrow if DOD says the lower three are off limits entirely?
I think that would be deeply problematic. As we said earlier, we received the report at the end of last week, and we should arrange a briefing for the DOD and NTIA to come to provide that briefing on what the report said. It is a balance, but economic competitiveness is national security. And making sure we have enough spectrum available for private sector innovation and 5G expansion is national security. And there are ways, if we are innovative, this shouldn't be a zero-sum game. We can make more spectrum available and also not take anything away from the DOD that they need to fulfill their mission.
Madam Secretary, in August, you visited China shortly after it was revealed that the PRC had hacked your email account. And they were privy to all of your emails. In an interview with CNN State of the Union, you argue that you were firm and direct about the hack with the Chinese counterparts. Do you think they viewed your visit as a sign of weakness?
I do not.
Okay. Are you aware of additional cabinet members that you were emailing with that they were able to access your emails from?
As you know, Senator, this is an active investigation, so I don't want to go into that in this public forum.
Obviously, this is concerning, right?
No doubt. The hack was concerning. It was unacceptable. I brought it up when I was there. It's more than concerning.
Okay. I just want to switch things up a little bit with the remaining time that I have as it relates to the BEAD program. Senator Vance asked a couple of questions in this regard. What does climate change have to do with broadband?
Climate change has to do with everything. Tell me your exact question.
Well, I'll be happy to. You have climate change requirements, and that the NOFU states eligible entities must account not only for current climate-related risks, but also for how the frequency, severity, and nature of these extreme events may plausibly evolve as our climate continues to change over the coming decades. Can you tell me anywhere though, Madam Secretary, anywhere where Congress has put into law that you would require them to mitigate climate change? Can you point to that section?
Congress requires us to be good stewards of taxpayer money.
That's not my question.
To be accountable.
Where are you drawing that authority from?
We have to fund projects that will be successful. Otherwise, we'll waste money.
So I understand you might think it's important. I understand Joe Biden might think it's important. But Congress hasn't actually said that's a requirement.
But you want us to fund projects that will be successful. And if climate events prevent success...
How does deploying broadband in Branson, Missouri have anything to do with your climate agenda?
I'll give you a great example. Well, no, but for example, Senator, I talk to people all the time, including in rural places, who tell me that due to climate events, their current technology doesn't work. Like they don't have the internet when there's a storm. So climate very definitely affects the effectiveness of certain technology to provide the internet to people.
Yeah, I can tell you, having just been elected by a state with a large rural population, they're interested in their kids being able to access the internet for homework. Okay? They're not interested in your social experiments. Okay? So just in the line of Senator Vance's question about, injecting identity politics into your applications, respectfully, how about we just deploy the broadband so people can access the internet?
Well, your state will receive $1.7 billion, and your governor will be providing us with a plan for how he feels it should be invested. So,
Senator Markey.
Thank you.
Thank you. And you have two of my all-time favorite witnesses here, so good to see you, Madam Secretary, and Ponch. You know you're somebody when you're a one-name wonder like Beyonce or Cher or Bono. So with the explosive growth over the past 2 decades, the semiconductor industry is a large contributor to the climate crisis, releasing the equivalent annual emissions of 1.4 million cars on the roads of the United States. Carbon emissions and water consumption are particularly intense for the production of the most advanced chips. As the Commerce Department prepares to issue $50 billion for chip manufacturing and R&D, we cannot ignore the environmental impact of this investment. Secretary Raimondo, I was pleased to see that the Department of Commerce is requiring chip companies to submit climate and environmental responsibility plans in their applications for the CHIPS Act funds. So, Madam Secretary, I understand that you're committing to ensuring that companies make good on their environmental commitments. Is that right?
Yes, and it isn't social policy. It's good business. Every CEO of every American company will tell you they have to manage risk. And there's risk associated with climate events. And if we don't plan for those climate events, then they can insert risk into these projects, whether it's broadband or chips. So this is, companies ought to design projects to minimize adverse impacts to the project from climate and the environment. That this is just good business and good taxpayer protection. It has nothing to do with the social agenda.
Oh, great. So major manufacturing activities, including chips manufacturing, can also lead to significant environmental justice concerns for communities surrounding the manufacturing plants. Developing chips is an incredibly water, energy, and chemically intensive process. The chemicals currently used in semiconductor fabrication are extremely dangerous to workers, community members, and their families. New technologies and processes are needed to manufacture semiconductors without these risks. So can you tell us how you're prioritizing that research so that it's truly green and clean in the semiconductor fabrication technologies?
Yes. So in addition to companies who are applying for taxpayer money, they have to show us a financial plan, an R&D plan, a security plan, and we want to see a sustainability plan that we can evaluate to make sure that they're serious about these commitments.
Yeah, so we're going to open the federal taxpayers' wallets to private sector companies, but we can't do so and close our eyes to the potential environmental harm to the communities where they're going to be located. We can do both at the same time. Now I want to move to the environmental impact of chip manufacture to the impact of chip use. So big data, machine learning, and AI all require huge numbers of chip cutting-edge semiconductors and create a significant environmental impact. A study from the University of Massachusetts Amherst estimated that the energy for developing one advanced AI algorithm out of millions of potential models of algorithms would emit as much CO2 as 5 cars over the algorithm's lifetime. And that could be millions of algorithms that are out there.
Yeah.
So these data centers are using scarce water supplies across our country for cooling these chips. And while AI proponents argue that AI will solve most of our pressing problems, the energy required to power this technology is contributing to the biggest problem of them all, climate change. So can you talk about how you're integrating your thinking at Commerce on these issues, as one solution to a set of problems could actually exacerbate another even larger set of problems?
It is such an excellent question. And as you think about AI and the compute power that is going to be required for training these large models, it's much greater than any of us thought. One area of innovation in chips is making chips that consume less energy. And so the research and development money that we will spend, the NSTC, I suspect much of it will go to exactly this innovation, which is to say high compute chips that are much more energy efficient. Because otherwise, this won't be sustainable. If you think what we need to do, match up what we need to do for sustainability with the amount of compute power, we need to have new innovations.
Yeah, and I wish my mother could hear a Rhodes Scholar tell me that I asked a good question. I wish you could hear that, Ma. So, and just finally on the labor front, the good jobs that we're trying to create so that these families can thrive, have good wages, healthcare benefits. And the Commerce Department is going to be providing billions to these companies. And my feeling is they should be required to maintain strong labor standards for their workers, and non-union companies must provide workers a free and fair chance to join a union and then bargain in good faith. Is that going to be the goal?
We agree.
Senator Young.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Secretary, good to have you here. Dr. Ponch, thank you. It's really important that my colleagues have an opportunity to ask these probing questions as it pertains to implementation of CHIPS and science, to make sure it's implemented consistent with congressional will, and that we have effective administration. So thank you for being here. In your testimony, Madam Secretary, you highlight the importance of being a good steward of taxpayer dollars. Can you tell the committee, in summary fashion, how you've worked hard to be a good steward of taxpayer dollars as it pertains to implementation of CHIPS and science, and then advise members who may be listening, because they ask me, how they can track on an ongoing basis implementation of CHIPS and science dollars, these investments?
Okay, so as I said earlier, we built a team of over 100 people to analyze each of these applications. Every company, in order to receive money, has to show us a financial plan, has to show us their books of their company, their research and development plan, their national security plan, their workforce plan. And as I said earlier, this has nothing to do with social policy. This is ensuring that these companies can get the job done. I don't want my taxpayer money given to a company that doesn't have a workforce plan and therefore can't get the job done. So all of those requirements are designed to do that. Furthermore, once we give the grant or structure the grant, there'll be like an agreement, a contract, a compliance agreement. They're going to receive the money contingent upon them doing certain things. And we will tranche the money out on the basis of those milestones.
Thank you. I've had some visibility into this process from the beginning and worked with you and members of your team who are implementing, and I know that you've hired on incredible talent, people with Wall Street experience, people who understand how much is needed for each of the stakeholders, and therefore much of your work is focused on making sure we don't overspend. So that we have more resources to spend more effectively and can advance national and economic security. With respect to the Tech Hub program, part of CHIPS and Science, the Regional Tech and Innovation Hub program, you've spoken to this already, Madam Secretary. State of Indiana, we've submitted an application called Heartland BioWorks, and if designated, this would help cement Indiana's position as a very important locus of biotech, medtech, genomics, and synthetic biology innovation. Secretary, Congress has only appropriated a portion of the Tech Hub's program funding. What opportunities are we missing, especially in regards to leveraging private sector investment by not prioritizing full funding of this program?
Yeah. First, I want to thank you because you were warrior to make sure the $500 million was in there. It's authorized at $10 billion. So we're missing massive opportunities. We have 400 applications from over 40 states, and we'll only be able to make maybe 5 or 6 sizable grants. As I said earlier, we'll designate, say, 20 tech hubs, plus or minus. Every one of them is probably worthy of maybe $100 million. That right there is $2 billion. So I think every bit of the $10 billion we could put to work to stimulate high-quality tech hubs. Your application is amazing, but then again, so are many of the others, and we will be really missing out.
Sure. Dr. Ponch, relatedly, Senator Heinrich and I recently introduced the Create AI Act to establish the National Artificial Intelligence Research Resource to serve as a test bed for the development of artificial intelligence and to help us harness the tech's amazing potential. Are you supportive of this Create AI Act? Yes or no, sir? Okay.
Strongly supportive, yes, yes.
Thank you. I have limited time, but if you could expand on the importance of federally funded research, including the National Science Foundation's National Artificial Intelligence Research Institutes, I'd appreciate that. And then the importance of appropriating the CHIPS and Science Act's research authorization. I would note at a time we're discussing artificial intelligence and the critical importance of this to our national security. The National Security Commission on AI has recommended funding at $32 billion per year, beginning in fiscal year 26, artificial intelligence. So that lays a predicate for your response, sir.
So as you know, AI of today has been made possible because of sustained investments, as I said earlier, through AI winters even over several decades. Here we are right now, and we have an adversarial competitor that's out investing in some of these areas. This is not the time to hold back. This is not the time to discuss and debate. This is the time to actually invest, out-compete in every aspect of what we need to do at AI. And what we cannot have, and I just want to make this very clear, what we cannot have is a situation like what we have in semiconductors today, where we are trying to put the Band-Aids and trying to get it back into what it needs to work. We cannot lose that advantage in AI or quantum or advanced wireless or biotechnology, you name it. And I'm extremely concerned that we are not moving fast enough because our competitors are outpacing us. And yes, we have a strategic advantage. We will not, and we should not, and must not lose it.
Thank you.
So thank you for all your support.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome to both of our witnesses today. Secretary Raimondo, I want to thank you for your leadership in executing the Regional Technology and Innovation Hub program. This committee worked very hard to craft that program, and the Appropriations Committee, on which I also sit, provided the initial funding to get this program up and running. And I have heard you loudly and clearly that we need to follow through with significant additional funding in the years to come. As you know, Wisconsin worked hard to submit one sole application focused on biohealth and personalized medicine technology with a significant private sector partnership and investment. As you also know, we have a rich history of innovation, world-class research institutions, and robust manufacturing, as well as a very strong workforce and work ethic. Wisconsin is poised to become a growth sector in this cutting-edge and valuable industry. I do not envy your team's task as you look through multiple applications, but I would have been remiss if I had not also highlighted our application, as many of my colleagues have today. Now, shifting a bit, but not much, one of the fundamental issues that the CHIPS and Science Act aims to address is the too common occurrence of our American companies doing cutting-edge research and development in the United States and then manufacturing their product elsewhere. That is the story of the semiconductor in a nutshell, and part of why the CHIPS Act was necessary in the first place. Now, current law requires inventions that stem from federally funded research to be manufactured in the United States, but that requirement is often waived and literally approved with just a rubber stamp. For example, a 2022 investigative report found that breakthrough battery technology invented in a federal lab and paid for with taxpayer dollars was licensed by the Department of Energy to a Chinese company and manufactured in China. Now, I know you are not here from the Department of Energy, but the Department of Commerce has an incredibly important role to play in the solution. Now, earlier this summer, President Biden signed the Invent It Here, Make It Here executive order. It bears a striking resemblance to legislation I introduced earlier this year with Senator Vance, which we called the Invent Here, Make Here Act. Great minds think alike. That's what I'll say. Our legislation goes a little bit further than the executive order. It actually forbids licenses from being granted to countries of concern as defined in CHIPS and science to include the PRC among others. So given your role in carrying out the executive order and the duties Congress granted you in the CHIPS and Science Act over commercialization, I'm interested to know your thoughts on the issue and the need for legislative action in this arena.
Thank you. So first of all, I fully agree with you that that's what happened with semiconductors, right? We used to make them in America in search of cheap labor. It all fled our shores, and look at where we are now. So I strongly support what you're trying to do. I also assure you there is no rubber stamping in these waivers. We have to be practical. Not everything is made in America. Not everything can be made in America. However, we had a fantastic visit in Kenosha. That is a perfect example of, because we at the Commerce Department have been holding their feet to the fire of those companies, we said, we're not going to give you a waiver. We don't believe we need to, and they found a way to manufacture in your state.
Well, and I just want to make the distinction between Buy America policies that said when we build out broadband, as you announced in Kenosha, Wisconsin, that we can't necessarily source, from Nokia if they're not going to make it here, but you and with the Buy America language persuaded them to bring those jobs and that technology to the U.S. But here we're talking about new inventions funded by taxpayer dollars. And that, I feel, we have a special obligation as stewards of our tax dollars to keep the manufacturing
Absolutely.
here.
No, I agree.
Senator Capito. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank both of you for being here with us today. Kind of a long afternoon. Secretary Raimondo and Dr. Ponch, I guess I can call you that, I did vote for this bill because I think it's very critical. Secretary Raimondo, thank you for all of what you've done in broadband. We're looking forward to rolling this out. You and I have talked about this more than a few times, and you know how very important it is, not just to me, but to the rest of the country. So I've been really interested to hear that your agency, the Department of Commerce, has run into an unexpected hurdle in implementing CHIPS, and that being the NEPA process. Well, I'm on the EPW committee. I'm the ranking member, and this is an issue. Doesn't matter if it's chip manufacturing, broadband development, transmission, energy exploration. Everything is being held up by the NEPA process, the permitting process, and often the ensuing litigation delays that come forward. So then I heard that Senator Cruz has an amendment with Senator Kelly to exempt the NEPA process for the fabs for this particular bill that would exempt the NEPA process. Is that correct? And you spoke in favor of that?
Yes.
How does this administration, with you as their representative, actually square exempting one industry over another when it's holding up progress in all of national security, energy security, communication, everything? Why would that be a good idea, and how can this administration think that's a good idea?
I can only speak to CHIPS, and what I said earlier was, sometimes these processes could take, 10 years or years. And each of these would be, for CHIPS, it's a national security imperative. So what we are doing, but of course, I want to be crystal clear, we have to maintain basic environmental protections, and we will as we build out these manufacturing facilities. We are not looking to get rid of environmental protections. We are just looking to have a more streamlined process.
Okay,
so
we agree
can
on
move
that.
more
I'm not
quickly.
into eliminating environmental protections.
But the length of all these projects, I would say to you, energy security is just as important as chip security. I would say transmission in this country is just as important as something that does the manufacturing chips. And then if you're going to manufacture the chips, you've got to mine them and recover them. And that means you have to permit the mine. If you look at arsenic, which is used in chips, 97% of that is from China. If you look at cobalt, 70% of that is from China. Rare earth elements, 60% of that is from China, 10% from the United States. Titanium, 86% from Japan. Noble gases are from Russia and Ukraine. But we have these resources in this country, but we can't get these mines to permit. So how are you going to go from permitting the fab when you can't get the materials permitted? There's a disconnect here. And, you know, I would be fine to try to work this disconnect out because as I said in the beginning, I think this is exceedingly important for our future.
Yeah. As you say, this is complicated and there is a balance. I know that the chair, in a bipartisan way, has worked on an amendment in the NDAA as it relates to chips. I'm in no way saying that these other issues aren't also important and they, you know, merit further discussion.
I just think it's rather ironic that an administration would actually make an exception for something they consider a marquee plan for them, albeit in the best interest of the country, when there's these other things that I think politically are more difficult to touch, that they wouldn't look for the streamlining of permitting, which should be fair and even across the board without giving up any environmental controls. I sit on the committee that does this. I've been very strong on air and water all the way through, but there's a better way to do it. Let me just ask you one quick question, and then you can respond. I think you've been asked this before, but I do obviously have my West Virginia Tech Hub application in, and we're all putting our foot on the scale for our own projects. I understand that the program requires 1/3 of Tech Hub grants and designations must significantly benefit a small and rural community. So that means one out of the 3 hub designations under Phase 2 would be awarded to rural communities. Is that a safe statement?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, 1/3.
Rural, or, right, 1/3, statutory requirement is 1/3 in rural or small communities.
Okay, so that's still the plan?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that's my
Thank you.
question.
Senator
Okay.
Sinema.
All right, sorry.
Thank you.
Well,
Got
thank you, Chair Cantwell.
A few people left. Just hurry if we can. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for our witnesses joining us today. And I'm proud to have played a central role in ensuring the Historic Chips and Science Act was signed into law. A year later, the positive impact on our economy and national security is clear. And nowhere is this more evident than in my state, Arizona. You know, we've led on chips since the 1940s and will continue to lead with the help of the Chips and Science Act. I was delighted to see the Department of Defense select Arizona State University's Southwest Advanced Prototyping Hub as the first and largest allocation from the law to continue its great work accelerating microelectronic research and development. In fact, since 2020, Arizona has led the nation in semiconductor investment. This includes major projects from Intel and TSMC. These investments are essential, but Arizona's leading semiconductor manufacturing ecosystem is built on the hundreds of chip-related companies working at all phases of the manufacturing lifecycle, as well as the academic institutions, workforce training programs, and small businesses that make it possible. And that's why it was so important to address semiconductor manufacturing holistically. You know, there was a time when it looked like the scientific development portions of the law would fall victim to partisan fighting. And thankfully, Senator Young, myself, and other members worked across the aisle to make sure that didn't happen. So turning to our witnesses, I want to first start by welcoming and recognizing my friend and fellow Arizonan Punch and the amazing work that you're doing at NSF. You know, I got to see your work advancing education, science, and innovation firsthand at ASU and in the senior advisory roles you played in our state government. And now I see that same dedicated insight implementing this legislation at the federal level. So thank you, Punch.
Thank you.
My first question for you is that the workforce provisions of the law, including the Chips for America Workforce Education Fund, are essential to building a healthy economy and fueling rewarding careers. Can you just briefly comment on how the NSF funding, along with public-private partnerships, have helped get resources where they're needed, specifically in Arizona?
Thank you very much, Senator Sinema. It's truly a pleasure to hear from you, and you're just taking me back to the years in Arizona by what you said, so it's always a pleasure. The workforce investments that we are making through the CHIPS and Science Act is a total of $200 million over 5 years. This year, it is $25 million. We are focusing on ensuring that pairing up with the investments by Intel and Micron as our partners who are co-investing with us are being deployed in ensuring that we are training the workforce, not only in terms of what we do with community colleges and universities, but also training the trainers, namely the teachers in K-12 institutions, so that we have this pipeline of talent ensured for times to come. So we are working on all of those component parts as we are thinking about deploying these resources. We are also working on some projects which is focused on internships with industry, as well as making sure that upskilling, reskilling efforts are also invested in. So it's a comprehensive investment of what we're doing with CHIPS and Science, as well as the main investments of NSF, which has always prioritized key technologies like semiconductor technologies. So we're very happy, and we're looking forward to the outcomes, which is very important at this time when there is so much of a need for trained, skilled, technical workforce in semiconductors that was pointed out by many of the senators today. So thank you so much for your support and championship of this CHIPS and Science Act.
Well, thanks so much, Panch. Secretary Raimondo, I appreciate the vision you outlined today for the department's economic and national security priorities at the heart of the CHIPS and Science Act. To keep pace with these goals, like establishing
Senate Commerce Committee, Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee will come to order. I thank my colleagues who many have been in this room for many hours already.
$500 connecting it to satellite.
It depends on the quality.
So you're saying it might be worth spending $200,000 of everyone's taxpayer money to connect to a $50,000 house when you could do it for $500?
Well,
did I hear that correctly, Madam?
First of all, this isn't my decision. Your governor and your state will provide a plan. Our job is to make sure that at the end of that plan, every single North Carolinian, regardless of where they live, has high quality, affordable
I appreciate
internet.
that, but I don't think spending $200,000
doesn't help
because
anyone.
here's what's happening. Let me get to the point. Thank you, Madam. Would it be worthwhile? And because here's what's actually happening. Would it be worthwhile for taxpayers to spend $200,000 on a fiber connection to a mansion that's worth $5 million?
Nobody says fiber has to be used. And I doubt the mansion
Well, there seems to be a
unconnected.
bias towards fiber. That's what's happening. It's happening right now because the Biden administration, it has shunned wireless and satellite alternatives. Further, Biden BEAD rules allow taxpayer subsidies to go towards building fiber to mansions and vacation homes. These rules prohibit states from funding non-fiber projects except in extreme situations. Now, these are extreme situations which you may have begun to elaborate on, but unless they get a waiver from the federal government to do the alternative. So I urge you to eliminate tech bias from your rules and put in sensible limits that would stop subsidizing millionaires. And in my remaining time, Madam Chair, I'd like to mention this report put out by the ranking member, the Red Light Report, which is to stop waste, fraud, and abuse in federal broadband funding, and I'd like to submit it for the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, and I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I don't see Senator Sullivan. I know he wanted to ask questions, but I don't see him on the screen, so I'm just going to ask a few and then wrap it up here so that you can get on to these meetings that you both have. Secretary Raimondo, supply chain resiliency depends on security, so there's a lot of discussion around here in the last several months about how to best get that, particularly when it could be backdoor attempts to information and communication technology, and data that can be used illegally for surveillance or espionage or various things. We have looked at this issue and been suggested to us from the administration that something like the GUARD Act, which would give commerce, when we think about this information age and technology and export and import controls, one thing is clear: we need a little better tool on the control of flow of what could be a backdoor of information or information that's just used in a way for purposes not friendly to our country, like illegal foreign surveillance. So we're concerned about targeting of military members, their families, immigrants. What do you think we should do about this, and what do you think about the GUARD Act proposal?
I am very supportive of the GUARD Act proposal. I'm often asked, should we outlaw TikTok? This is bigger than TikTok. Certainly TikTok poses national security risks, to be clear. But we need a comprehensive plan to update. As you say, the threats are different today than they were 10 years ago. And so the right way to do this is to empower us with a statutory set of tools to have a comprehensive approach to these connected apps that pose the national security risks you say, TikTok and others. And so I'm supportive of attacking it in a comprehensive statutory way.
And so appreciate that. Director Ponch, we're oversubscribed on the NSF side. We're oversubscribed. How do we I suggest that we have more conversation about this, but how do we, from a scientific side, tell our colleagues on the appropriation side that we have shortfalls that could, I loved all these questions about both where we go, because obviously the bill is about creating a distributed generation of R&D. Yeah. And we already are pretty distributed, pretty competitive, way better than a top-down model of, say, other countries. But I always say that two guys named Bill created our economies, Bill Boeing and Bill Gates, right? So you never know where the next bill is going to come from. And so that's why we want a more distributed generation of R&D. But what are we going to do about the shortfall with our appropriators, that there's so much in the pipeline that could be effective?
At so many levels, I'm so glad, Chair Cantwell, you've been a strong supporter and a champion of the CHIPS and Science Act, and I know how hard you worked, so thank you very much. On behalf of the science and technology community, we owe you a debt of gratitude, and to all the folks that supported this. So I just want to say that let me take the basic research paradigm. 50,000 proposals, we fund 11,000 of them. 20,000 of them are being told that we should fund them. They're highly meritorious. We are leaving them on the chopping floor, which means a huge loss, and our competitors are taking advantage of that. On the regional innovation engines and regional technology hubs that the Secretary talked about, they have 400 proposals, we had 700 proposals, and then we had another 130 proposals in type 2. We are not going to be able to fund all the top quality proposals that needs to be invested in. These are ideas that are being left behind.
Here's what I suggest, that we get an answer from the scientific community about the science necessary on these proposals. Like, yes, you get an A on your paper. It is definitely where we should be investing, but we don't have the resources.
Yes.
That's what I think we need. Not that we want some people to have failing grades on these proposals, but so that we're prioritizing and people can see that this is really need. Okay, this hearing will remain open the record will remain open for 4 weeks until November 1st, 2023. Any senators liking to submit questions for the record could do so 2 weeks from now by October 18th. And we ask that responses to this be done by November 1st. So thank you to the witnesses. Thank you to all our colleagues. We kind of had a double feature today in the committee, but had very good attendance at both, which I think it shows the interest of members, particularly to this afternoon in this very important legislation. Thank you both for your tremendous leadership on America's competitiveness. We're adjourned.